One of the oldest arguments in the book when it comes to dunking on Batman or even just other heroes is that they're just as responsible for creating new villains as they are for putting them away. Their very presence invites challenge, supposedly, meaning the longer they're around, more and more radical villains will rise to meet them. But what about the opposite? Given supervillains are actually in the business of making people's lives a, misery, it stands to reason that they've directly or indirectly inspired their own heroic rivals, and plenty have. I'm Ewan, you're watching What Culture Comics, and here are 10 comic book supervillains who created their own worst enemy. Number 10. The Pride and the Runaways. The Runaways made their debut in the pages of Marvel Comics a little close to 2 decades ago now, which is a frankly ridiculous thing to say aloud. But regardless of however old Brian K. Vaughan and Adrian Alphona's comic is now though, it remains one of the best examples of supervillains inspiring their own worst enemies, in this case their own children. The Runaways are so cool because they band together after discovering that literally all their parents are part of a group known as the Pride, a sinister cabal of supervillains comprised of aliens, magicians, and other generic evildoers. Rather than follow in their folks' footsteps though, the kids decide to take a different approach, utilizing their inherited gifts to thwart the Pride and the other villains who emerge in its wake. Number 9. Mephisto and Ghost Rider. It might not have been Mephisto all along in WandaVision, but if you live in the Marvel Universe and wake up in the night with your head on fire and with an uncontrollable urge to smite evil, then there's a good chance it actually was. To date, most of the main Ghost Riders in Marvel Comics have all had their run-ins with Mephisto, the rascally, uber-powerful demonic presence who gets his kicks from offering up Faustian bargains to any poor soul down on their luck. Both the Johnny Blaze and Dan Ketch Riders have the character to thank for their fiery predicaments. Both have done their damnedest to inconvenience Mephisto whenever the opportunity arises. After years spent harvesting the souls of various nasty folks, Johnny Blaze was finally able to challenge Mephisto with a little old help from Doctor Strange. As told in Donny Cates, Nick Spencer, and Rod Reese's Damnation event, the Sorcerer Supreme was able to place Blaze as the new ruler of Mephisto's realm, leading to a battle between the pair that resulted in Mephisto being trapped in Las Vegas's Hotel Inferno. Number 8. The Shadow King and Professor X. It's probably fair to say that Charles Xavier had a bit of a rough upbringing. His father died when Charles was only a child, and he later learns after his mutant powers manifest that his father's business partner Kurt, who had also married Charles's mother just for the money, was partially responsible. Following another accident, this time caused by Charles and Kurt's son Kane, the eventual Juggernaut, Kurt also perishes. The young Xavier is still able to use his gifts to make sure he realizes his talents though, growing up and attending Oxford University. A brief excursion in Korea during the War of 1950 to 1953 is then followed up by a gap year of sorts, which leads Xavier to encounter his first ever mutant in Amal Farouk, who was possessed by a demonic entity known as the Shadow King. It was this encounter that inspired Xavier to use his gifts to help other mutants and humans, as he realized just how dangerous his own psychic powers could be if turned against innocents. Xavier would battle the Shadow King many times more in the future, only this time with an entire team of gifted mutants by his side. The moral of the story? Never underestimate the power of a good gap year. Number 7. Ultimate Green Goblin and Spider-Man. Brian Michael Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man is one of the greatest comic book runs of all time and my personal favourite Spidey series ever. Joined by artists Mark Bagley and then Stuart Immonen and Sarah Pichelli, Bendis was tasked with bringing the lead Ditko character into the 21st century, modernising aspects of the web-slinger's mythology both narratively and visually speaking. Among the more compelling changes made for Spidey's ultimate makeover was Norman Osborn. Depicted as a costume crook with enhanced abilities in the traditional 616 canon, the Green Goblin of Earth 1610 was a hulking monstrosity, a truly terrifying prospect for the young Peter Parker to come up against. The other interesting wrinkle with the ultimate incarnation of these characters is that the spider that gives Peter his powers is directly tied to Oscorp's research. Peter is bitten by a genetically modified arachnid containing the Oz compound, a mutagen developed by Osborn intended to create super soldiers for S.H.I.E.L.D. Seeing the results of the drug on Peter, Norman then injects himself with the compound directly, turning him into the hulking version of the Goblin we all know and fear, and setting them both on a deadly collision course. Number 6. The Shredder and Master Splinter. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have undergone plenty of changes over the decades, some in an attempt to make the group more family-friendly, and others purely for the sake of giving the formula a bit of a shake-up. One thing that has not changed since the original Kevin Eastman and Peter-led comic, though, is the rivalry between the Turtles, their Master Splinter, and the Shredder. In nearly every incarnation, Oroku Saki is responsible for invoking the ire of Splinter and his 4 reptilian sons, and you can't say he doesn't deserve it. In the original Mirage Comics incarnation, the Shredder killed Splinter's master, Hamato Yoshi, who was teaching the young rat the ways of ninjutsu. When Splinter eventually encounters the 4 turtles doused in goo in a Manhattan sewer, he mutates along with them and becomes their sensei, teaching them everything his master taught him so that one day they could overcome and defeat the Shredder. Other continuities vary, with the current IDW series depicting Splinter, Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello, and Michelangelo as reincarnated versions of Yoshi and his sons, who were murdered by Saki in feudal Japan, but Shredder is always to blame for igniting the feud in the first place, as well as for laying the foundations of his own downfall. Number 5. KNULL and the Symbiotes. Sometimes the consequences of a villain's actions are observed pretty quickly, as with the aforementioned rivalry between Ultimate Peter Parker and Norman Osborn. Other times, the full ramifications take a bit longer to manifest, like with Joe Chill killing Bruce Wayne's parents. And then there's KNULL, an eldritch being of pure darkness who had to wait billions of years to receive his just desserts after one of his symbiote creations finally stood up against him, Venom. Also, this entry is a bit of a double whammy when you think about it, as there'd be no Venom without Spider-Man, and no Venom without KNULL. Either way, long story short, KNULL is a being who existed before the Big Bang. As the god of darkness, he was naturally opposed to the light and took particular grievance with the Celestials who began exploring the cosmos. As a result, he forged the first ever symbiote, All Black, a sword comprised of pure darkness that KNULL used to decapitate one of the intruders. But time would pass, and after encountering a young Thor and learning how ignoble their master was, the symbiotes created by KNULL rebelled, entrapping the god on a planet and adopting the name Clintar. One such symbiote, Venom, would embark on its own redemptive journey after being abandoned by Spider-Man and then corrupted by Eddie Brock. After adopting a number of different hosts, Venom returned to Eddie and the two fought KNULL together, using Mjolnir and the Silver Surfer's cosmic board to kill him once and for all. Number 4. Ultron and Vision. As far as comic book rivalries go, the one between Ultron and Vision is pretty poetic. Just think about it for a second. Hank Pym creates Ultron, who then rebels against his creator and resolves to destroy humanity. But just as Hank is initially defeated by his own creation, so too is Ultron when he creates Vision, an android with the body of the original Human Torch and the brainwave patterns of Wonder Man, a superhero who, at the time, was believed to be dead. It doesn't take long at all for Vision to rebel against his android father because, you know, superhero brain and all that, which then leads to Ultron's first defeat. Vision went on to become one of the most important members of the Avengers and one who always rose to the challenge of defeating Ultron whenever he returned, determined to embrace humanity where his creator condemned it. Number 3. DARKSEID and Orion. Jack Kirby's Fourth World Saga is undoubtedly the most epic in the comics medium. The writer/artist left Marvel for rivals DC towards the end of the 1960s and set about erecting a new comics mythology of his own. Kirby's cosmic focus would remain, but fantasy was also a key influence. The core premise of the book revolves around two warring planets, one that stands for all that is good in the universe, New Genesis, led by the benevolent High Father, and the other all that is not, Apocalypse, ruled by the demonic despot Darkseid. But when High Father and Darkseid grow weary of battle, they decide to work out an elaborate truce. To guarantee an end to hostilities, High Father gives his own son, scot-free, to Darkseid. The Lord of Apocalypse returns the favor, giving his own son Orion to High Father to be raised on New Genesis. Both of these children would eventually rebel against Darkseid, with Orion having been taught the values of bravery and goodness by his fellow New Gods, and Scott, aka Mr. Miracle, discovering the power of love when he meets the female Fury Big Barda. Darkseid had a hand in both of their creations, and they've proven time and again to be the New Gods most capable of opposing his might. Number 2. Joker and Batman. Batman 1989. Boasting gorgeous set design, an exemplary score from composer Danny Elfman, and 2 iconic performances from Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson as Batman and the Joker respectively, Tim Burton's gothic rendition The Caped Crusader is as brilliant as it is influential. For all that the film captured the darker tone of the Bronze and Modern Age Batman comics though, it did diverge from the source material in several areas, the most notable of course being Batman's origin. Rather than having Bruce Wayne's parents be gunned down by Joe Chill or a random Gotham crook, Burton and screenwriter Sam Hamm made it so that the Joker, then going by the name of Jack Napier as a small-time Gotham gangster, was responsible for their murder. Your mileage may vary when it comes to whether or not you think it adds or detracts from the story, but it's a decision that comes back to bite the Joker regardless. And number 1. Blight and Terry McGinnis' Batman. Batman Beyond remains one of the absolute coolest reinventions of Batman ever committed to print or screen, and at its center is Terry McGinnis. Terry, voiced by Will Friedle, was just a kid trying to survive high school in Neo-Gotham when his paths crossed with Bruce Wayne. Terry's father, Warren, was a scientist at Wayne Powers and was murdered by the company's CEO, Derek Powers, for having harbored evidence revealing the company's illegal viral weapons research. Terry decides to take matters into his own hands and ends up discovering Wayne's secret. He then steals the bat suit and decides to go after Derek, who he realizes was responsible for his father's murder. While Terry was initially unable to take down Derek, he did accidentally seal his fate in the process. In their debut scuffle, Powers was exposed to the deadly virus he'd been trying to keep under wraps. He has to undergo some serious radiation therapy in order to stave off the infection, which transforms him into the being known as Blight, a radioactive supervillain with a healthy green glow, only instead of bringing love, he brings violence. And though Blight would eventually perish during his final confrontation with the new Batman, he did get to deliver an absolute stonker of a line beforehand. When Terry confronts Powers and tells him he killed his father, he responds by saying,
"Do you have the slightest idea how little that narrows it down?"
The line itself is hilarious on its own, but to see it come out of a big glowy skeleton man following a brief pause, it's brutally brilliant. And those were 10 supervillains who created their own worst enemy. Know of any other examples where a villain's actions came back to bite them in the booty? Let us know in the comments below. Drop the video a like if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to What Culture Comics so you don't miss another upload going forward. I've been Ewan. You can catch me doing my best Batman Beyond dance moves on Twitter at EwanRuinsThings, and I will see you next time. Bye!